Ethan Cross shifted uncomfortably on the cold, uneven steps of the Register of Marriage. The morning air carried a biting chill, sharp enough to cut through the layers of his patched jacket and second-hand sweater. It had been 3 long, grueling months since he first began this experiment. Months of discomfort, hunger, and solitude. He adjusted the worn cap on his head, tugging it lower to shield his face, though he doubted anyone passing by would bother to look closely. To the world, he was just another faceless figure among the sea of beggars lining the city's streets. It was ironic, really. Ethan Cross, CEO of Cross Enterprises, a man who graced magazine covers and Forbes lists, now sat unnoticed, blending into the cracks of the pavement. He had traded tailored suits for threadbare clothes, luxury cars for a pair of scuffed boots, and lavish parties for the unforgiving cold of the city streets. All of this in pursuit of something he'd begun to doubt even existed: genuine love. From his perch near the grand entrance, he watched the couples entering the marriage registry. Some arrived hand in hand, their faces glowing with joy and anticipation. Others seemed more hesitant, exchanging nervous glances or muttered words. The air buzzed with laughter, arguments, and the occasional cheer as newlyweds emerged into the sunlight, clutching their marriage certificates like trophies. It was a stark contrast to Ethan's world, one of isolation and quiet despair. His stomach growled faintly, a dull reminder of his self-imposed deprivation. The nearby vendors only made it worse, their cries cutting through the morning bustle. Fresh coffee, warm pastries, beef sticks, straight off the grill. The tantalizing scents wafted toward him, stirring a hunger he couldn't afford to satisfy, not in his current disguise. Ethan's gaze drifted to his reflection in a nearby puddle. He hardly recognized the man staring back at him, gone were the sharp cheekbones and piercing blue eyes that once turned heads in boardrooms and banquets. His face was obscured by a scruffy beard, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He looked every bit the part of a man who had fallen on hard times. It was a transformation meticulously planned, yet the weight of it felt heavier with each passing day. His thoughts wandered back to the reason he was here. Months ago, after his last disastrous relationship, one that ended when he discovered she was more interested in his bank account than his heart, he had vowed to take a different approach. If he couldn't find someone who loved him for who he truly was, then what was the point of it all? And so he devised this unusual test. By disguising himself as a beggar, he hoped to encounter someone who could see past appearances and wealth, someone whose kindness wasn't contingent on his status. But the test was proving far more difficult than he had imagined. Day after day, people hurried past him, their eyes avoiding his. Some tossed a few coins his way, but none stopped to speak or offer more than a fleeting glance. He began to wonder if this plan was destined to fail. Perhaps he had been foolish to believe in such a romantic ideal. The clamor of the crowd pulled him from his thoughts. He watched as a young couple approached the entrance, their laughter ringing out like a melody. The woman's eyes sparkled as she clung to her partner's arm, her love for him unmistakable. Ethan felt a pang of envy, followed by a wave of doubt. Would anyone ever look at him that way, especially now, as he sat here, invisible to the world? He leaned back against the cold stone wall, his paper cup clutched tightly in his hands. The cup was empty, save for a few coins that jingled softly with each movement. It had become both a prop and a symbol of his growing disillusionment. How long could he keep this up? How long before he admitted defeat and returned to his old life, a life of wealth and emptiness? As the sun climbed higher, the activity around the registry grew. Vendors shouted louder, couples gathered in larger numbers, and the aroma of grilled meat filled the air. Ethan's stomach growled again, louder this time, a sharp reminder of his hunger. He sighed and closed his eyes, willing the sensation to fade. "Excuse me, sir." The voice was soft, hesitant, and utterly unexpected. Ethan's eyes snapped open, and he found himself staring up at a young woman. She was standing just a few feet away, holding something in her hand. Her appearance caught him off guard, not because she was stunningly beautiful, though she was, but because she was looking directly at him. Her warm brown eyes met his with an openness he hadn't encountered in months. For a moment, he struggled to find his voice. Can I help you?" he managed, though the irony of his words wasn't lost on him. She smiled gently and held out the item in her hand, a freshly grilled beef stick, wrapped neatly in a napkin. "You looked hungry," she said simply. "I thought you might like this." Ethan stared at the offering, his mind racing. After months of being ignored, this small act of kindness felt almost surreal. He hesitated, wondering if there was some hidden motive behind her gesture. But her expression was genuine, free of pity or pretense. "Thank you," he said finally, reaching out to take the beef stick. His fingers brushed against hers briefly, and he was struck by how warm her hand felt against the chill of the air. She nodded, her smile widening. "No problem. I always end up buying too many of these anyway. They're my favorite." He chuckled softly, the sound surprising even himself. "You like beef sticks too, huh?" "Who doesn't?" she replied, her tone light and playful. "They're the perfect snack." For a moment, they stood there in silence, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. Ethan found himself studying her face, the delicate curve of her jaw, the faint freckles that dotted her nose, the way her hair framed her features. She looked real, uncomplicated, kind. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. He hesitated, the weight of his disguise pressing down on him. "Ethan," he said finally, deciding to stick with the truth, at least partially. "Lily," she said, offering her own name in return. "Nice to meet you, Ethan." As she turned to leave, Ethan felt a sudden, inexplicable panic. He couldn't let her walk away, not without knowing more about her. "Wait," he called after her. "Why did you stop? No one else does." She paused, glancing back at him. Her expression was thoughtful, her eyes searching his face. "Because everyone deserves a little kindness," she said simply. "Besides, you looked like someone who could use a friend." With that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ethan standing there with the beef stick in his hand, and a strange mix of emotions swirling in his chest. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, tentative hope, that perhaps he wasn't as invisible as he had come to believe. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the stone steps, Ethan found himself replaying the encounter in his mind. Who was Lily? And why had her simple act of kindness affected him so deeply? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain. He couldn't let this be the last time they met. The following morning, Ethan found himself back at the same spot on the steps of the Register of Marriage. It had rained overnight, and the air smelled of damp concrete and wet leaves. He adjusted his worn cap and leaned against the wall, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of Lily. Her unexpected kindness had stirred something in him, something he couldn't quite place. He couldn't shake the memory of her smile or the way her eyes had softened when she handed him the beef stick. It wasn't just the act itself that lingered in his mind. It was the way she had looked at him, not with pity or judgment, but with genuine warmth. For months he had been invisible to the world, but in that brief moment she had seen him. The thought both excited and unnerved him. Who was she? What kind of person stopped for a stranger like him? He realized he didn't even know if she worked nearby, lived in the area, or was just passing through. If he wanted to see her again, he'd have to act quickly. As the morning stretched on, Ethan kept his eyes on the crowd, scanning for any sign of Lily. The usual parade of couples and families filed in and out of the registry, their faces a mixture of joy and anxiety. Vendors shouted their wares, children tugged on their parents' hands, and the occasional street musician played for spare change. It was a scene Ethan had witnessed countless times, yet today it felt different, charged with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in months. Hours passed, and there was still no sign of her. Ethan's shoulders sagged, and he let out a frustrated sigh. Maybe she wasn't coming back. Maybe she had been a fleeting moment of kindness in an otherwise indifferent world. He was about to retreat into his thoughts when a voice startled him. "Back again, huh?" Ethan looked up and saw Lily standing a few feet away, a paper bag in her hand. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She looked as effortlessly beautiful as he remembered. Yeah," he stammered, caught off guard by her sudden appearance. "I guess I'm a creature of habit." She smiled and sat down beside him, the movement so casual it left him momentarily speechless. Most people avoided sitting too close to him, as if proximity alone might tarnish them, but Lily didn't seem to care. "I brought you something," she said, holding out the paper bag. "It's just a sandwich and a bottle of water. Hope that's okay." Ethan took the bag, his hands brushing against hers briefly. "You didn't have to do that," he said, though his stomach betrayed him with a low growl. "I wanted to," she replied simply. "Besides, I figured you might be hungry." He hesitated for a moment before opening the bag. Inside was a neatly wrapped sandwich and a small bottle of water. It wasn't much, but to Ethan it felt like a feast. He took a bite, savoring the taste of fresh bread and deli meat. "Thank you," he said after swallowing. "This means a lot." She waved off his gratitude. "It's no big deal. So Ethan, what's your story? How'd you end up here?" The question caught him off guard. He had prepared a backstory for his disguise, a vague tale of bad luck and lost opportunities. But now, faced with Lily's genuine curiosity, he found himself reluctant to lie. Instead, he decided to offer a version of the truth, carefully edited to maintain his cover. "I guess you could say I made some bad choices," he began. "Trusted the wrong people, lost everything. Ended up here trying to figure out what's next." Lily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That must be hard. Starting over, I mean." "It is," he admitted. "But sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters." Her eyes met his, and for a moment there was a quiet understanding between them. She didn't press for more details, and he was grateful for that. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about his favorite foods, books, and movies. Their conversation flowed easily, and Ethan found himself laughing for the first time in months. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan learned more about Lily. She worked as a freelance illustrator, splitting her time between small commissions and personal projects. She loved animals, especially dogs, and had a rescue mutt named Max. She enjoyed hiking, painting, and, as she had mentioned before, had an inexplicable fondness for beef sticks. "You're full of surprises," Ethan said, smiling. "I wouldn't have pegged you as a beef stick enthusiast." She laughed, the sound light and melodic. "What can I say? I like what I like." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden sound of raised voices nearby. A man and woman were arguing loudly near the entrance of the registry, their heated exchange drawing the attention of passers-by. Lily glanced at them briefly before turning back to Ethan. "People sure know how to put on a show," she said, shaking her head. "Yeah," Ethan replied, though his mind was elsewhere. He was struck by how comfortable he felt around Lily, as if they had known each other for years instead of hours. It was a strange and unfamiliar feeling, but one he found himself wanting to hold on to. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the city in a warm golden light, Lily stood and brushed off her jeans. "I should get going," she said, "but it was nice talking to you, Ethan." "Wait," he said, rising to his feet. "Will I see you again?" She hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "Maybe," she said finally. "I come by here pretty often. You never know." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there with the paper bag in his hands and a strange mix of emotions swirling in his chest. He watched her disappear into the crowd, her ponytail bouncing with each step. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Ethan sat back down on the steps, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't let this be the end of their story. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone worth breaking his disguise for. But how could he tell her the truth without ruining everything? And what would she think if she found out who he really was? The questions weighed heavily on him as he stared out at the bustling city, the sounds of laughter and music blending into the hum of the evening. Ethan didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't ready to give up. Not on Lily, and not on the possibility of finding something real. The days following his second encounter with Lily passed in a blur for Ethan. He returned to the steps of the Register of Marriage each morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. She had mentioned she came by often, but what did often mean? Every day, every week? The uncertainty gnawed at him, a sharp contrast to the unwavering confidence he once carried as the CEO of Cross Enterprises. Ethan had built an empire on precise calculations and meticulous planning. Every decision he made in his business life was backed by data, logic, and a firm understanding of risk and reward. But sitting on the cold, damp stone steps each day, waiting for a woman who might not return, was a gamble he couldn't control. It made him feel vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced before. Still, he waited. 3 days passed before Lily appeared again. Ethan spotted her as she weaved through the bustling crowd, her pace unhurried but purposeful. She carried a sketch pad under her arm, her hair tied up in a loose bun that bounced slightly with each step. She looked radiant, even in her casual jeans and oversized sweater, and Ethan's chest tightened at the sight of her. This time, she spotted him first. A smile lit up her face as she approached, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. "Still here, I see," she said teasingly, sitting down beside him without hesitation. "I guess you really like this spot." "I guess I do," he replied, unable to hide the grin spreading across his face. "And you? What brings you back?" She held up her sketchpad. "Inspiration. I like drawing people, and this place is always full of interesting faces." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Interesting faces, huh? I hope I made the cut." "You might have," she said with a playful smirk, flipping open the sketchpad to a blank page. "I've been meaning to ask, do you mind if I sketch you?" He blinked, caught off guard by the request. "Sketch me?" "Yeah," she said, her tone light but sincere. "You have an interesting look. There's something about your eyes like they're carrying a story." Ethan hesitated. The idea of being drawn, of having Lily's focus trained so intently on him, made him uneasy. What if she saw something in his face that gave away his secret? But at the same time, the thought of being part of her world, even in a small way, was irresistible. "Sure," he said finally. "Why not?" Lily's smile widened. "Great. Just sit still for a bit, okay?" As she began to sketch, Ethan watched her in quiet fascination. Her brow furrowed slightly in concentration, and her pencil moved across the page with swift, deliberate strokes. She was completely absorbed in her work, and Ethan found himself wondering what it would be like to live in her world, a world of art, creativity, and simple joys. "Do you do this often?" he asked after a while. "Drawing strangers, I mean." "Sometimes," she replied, not looking up. "I like capturing moments. People have so much going on beneath the surface, you know? It's like trying to catch a glimpse of their soul." Her words struck a chord with him. Ethan had spent so much time hiding behind a facade, both as a beggar and as a billionaire, that he wondered if anyone had ever truly seen his soul. "Done," Lily said, breaking the silence. She turned the sketchpad around to show him, and Ethan felt a jolt of surprise. The drawing was remarkable, not just in its technical skill, but in the way it captured him. There was a depth to his expression, a raw vulnerability that he hadn't even realized he was wearing. "Wow," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's incredible." "Thanks," she said, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "You have a great face for drawing. Lots of character." Ethan chuckled, though her words left him feeling exposed. "I'll take that as a compliment." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Lily shared more about her life, her struggles as a freelance artist, her dreams of illustrating children's books, and her love for quiet evenings spent sketching with her dog curled up at her feet. Ethan listened intently, marveling at how effortlessly she opened up to him. But he couldn't bring himself to share much about his own life. The weight of his secret loomed large, and he knew that the truth would change everything. For now, he was content to bask in her company, even if it meant keeping her at arm's length. As the sun began to set, Lily glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should get going," she said, gathering her things. "Max is probably wondering where I am." "Max?" Ethan asked. "My dog," she explained. "He's a rescue, a big goofball, but I love him." Ethan smiled. "He's lucky to have you." "Thanks," she said, standing up. "Maybe I'll bring him by sometime. He'd love the attention." "I'd like that," Ethan said, standing as well. "Take care, Lily." "You too, Ethan," she said, her eyes lingering on his for a moment before she turned and walked away. That night, Ethan lay awake in his small rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling. His encounter with Lily replayed in his mind, each moment etched with vivid clarity. He thought about her smile, her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her art. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Unpretentious, compassionate, and real, but with each passing day, the weight of his secret grew heavier. How long could he keep up this charade? What would Lily think if she discovered the truth? He had set out on this journey to find someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had. But now that he had found her, the thought of losing her terrified him. The next day, Ethan decided to take a risk. He arrived at the steps of the registry early, clutching a small envelope in his hands. Inside was a simple note, written in neat, precise handwriting. "Dinner? Tomorrow? At 7? I'll meet you here." When Lily arrived later that afternoon, Ethan handed her the envelope, his heart pounding in his chest. She opened it and read the note, a smile spreading across her face. "Are you asking me out?" she teased, her eyes twinkling. "Maybe," he said, his voice betraying his nerves. "What do you say?" "I say yes," she replied, her smile widening, "but only if you promise not to make me eat beef sticks." Ethan laughed, relief washing over him. "Deal." The following evening, Ethan arrived early at the small cafe where they had agreed to meet. He had chosen a modest place, the kind of restaurant where his tattered clothes wouldn't draw too much attention. He waited nervously at a corner table, his mind racing with questions. Would Lily show up? And if she did, would this be the night he told her the truth? When she walked in, Ethan felt his breath catch. She was wearing a simple dress that hugged her figure, her hair cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. She looked stunning, yet completely at ease, as if she belonged in any setting. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "You clean up well." Ethan chuckled, feeling self-conscious. "I do my best." The dinner was a mix of light-hearted banter and deeper conversation. They talked about everything: art, travel, their favorite childhood memories. Ethan found himself relaxing in her presence, the weight of his secret momentarily forgotten. But as the night wore on, the thought crept back into his mind. He knew he couldn't keep lying to her, not if he wanted this, whatever this was, to last. The truth was a ticking time bomb, and every moment he delayed felt like borrowed time. "Lily," he said softly, his voice tinged with hesitation, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him, her expression curious but unguarded. "What is it?" Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess who he was and why he was here, but the fear of losing her held him back. "Never mind," he said finally, forcing a smile. "It's nothing." Lily frowned slightly, as if sensing his hesitation, but she didn't press him. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Whatever it is," she said gently, "you can tell me when you're ready." Ethan nodded, his heart aching with gratitude and guilt. He didn't know how much longer he could keep up the charade, but one thing was certain: he couldn't imagine his life without Lily in it. Ethan paced the small room he had been renting, the threadbare carpet doing little to muffle the sound of his restless footsteps. The truth was an unbearable weight pressing down on him, and he couldn't carry it any longer. Every moment he spent with Lily felt like a lie, and the longer he delayed telling her who he really was, the greater his fear grew of what her reaction might be. But he couldn't lose her. Not now, not when he was so sure she was the one person who saw him for who he was, or at least who he wanted to be. He had tested her kindness, her sincerity, and her heart, but in doing so he had built their connection on a foundation of deceit. If their relationship was going to have any future, it needed to start with the truth. The next evening, Ethan arrived at their usual meeting spot by the steps of the Register of Marriage. The air was crisp, and the faint glow of streetlights illuminated the bustling crowd. Lily arrived a few minutes later, her smile warm and inviting as always. She wore a light scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, her cheeks slightly flushed from the cold. "You're early," she said teasingly as she approached him. "I wanted to make sure I didn't miss you," Ethan replied, his voice tight with nervous energy. They walked for a while, weaving through the city streets. The hum of activity around them provided a comfortable backdrop to their conversation, but Ethan was only half listening. His mind was focused on what he needed to say. Finally, as they reached a quieter stretch of the park, Ethan stopped and turned to face her. "Lily," he began, his tone serious, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." Her smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression of curiosity and concern. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to reveal. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," he admitted. "The man you've gotten to know, the man you've been kind to, that's not the whole story." Lily's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I'm not who you think I am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not homeless or struggling the way I've let you believe. My name is Ethan Cross, and I'm the CEO of Cross Enterprises." Lily stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, as if struggling to process his words. "I started coming here because I wanted to find someone who would care about me for who I am. Not for my money or my status," Ethan continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I disguised myself as a beggar to see if there was anyone who could look past the surface and see the person underneath. And then I met you." He searched her face for a reaction, but her expression remained unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive. "You lied to me," Lily said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "You pretended to be someone you're not." "I know," Ethan said quickly, "and I hate that I deceived you. But everything else, every moment we spent together, every conversation we had, that was real. You made me feel seen, Lily, in a way no one else ever has. I didn't know how to tell you the truth without risking what we had." Lily looked away, her gaze fixed on the ground. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and Ethan could see the tension in her posture. He took a step closer, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I need a minute," she said, her voice tight. Ethan nodded, giving her space. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. He watched as she paced back and forth, her expression shifting between anger, hurt, and confusion. Finally, she stopped and turned to face him. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you think it's okay to manipulate people like that, to test them without their knowledge?" "It wasn't about manipulation," Ethan said earnestly. "It was about finding something real. My entire life, people have only cared about my wealth and what I can offer them. I needed to know if someone could care about me without all of that. And you did, Lily. You cared." Lily shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "You don't get to decide how people prove their kindness or their love, Ethan. What you did, it's not fair. You put me in a situation where I didn't even know the rules of the game." Ethan's chest tightened. "You're right," he said softly. "I was wrong to deceive you, and if I could go back and do it differently, I would. But please believe me when I say that I care about you, Lily. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone." Lily was silent for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said quietly. "Not after this." Ethan felt a wave of despair crash over him. He had known this was a possibility, but hearing the words still cut deep. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust," he said. "I'll prove to you that what I feel is real. Just please don't walk away." Lily looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "I need time to think," she said. "I can't make any decisions right now." "I understand," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." The days that followed were some of the longest of Ethan's life. He spent every moment replaying their conversation, questioning his choices and hoping that Lily would find it in her heart to forgive him. He stayed away from the register of marriage, giving her the space she had asked for, but the absence of her presence was a constant ache. It was nearly a week later when Lily finally reached out. She called him, her voice hesitant but calm, and asked to meet at a cafe near her apartment. Ethan agreed without hesitation, arriving early and nervously awaiting her arrival. When she walked in, his heart leapt. She looked as beautiful as ever, but there was a guardedness in her expression that hadn't been there before. She sat down across from him, her hands clasped around a steaming cup of coffee. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, her voice steady. "About you, about what you did, and about us." Ethan held his breath, afraid to interrupt her. "I was hurt," she continued, "and I still am to some extent. But I've also been thinking about why you did what you did. And while I don't agree with it, I can understand the loneliness that drove you to it. Lily, Ethan began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish," she said gently. "I care about you, Ethan. I care about the person I got to know, the person who made me laugh and listen to my stories, and I think that person is real even if the circumstances weren't." Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "He is real," he said earnestly. "I promise you, Lily, everything I felt for you, everything we shared, it was real." She nodded slowly. "But trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. If we're going to try to make this work, it's going to take time, and I need you to be patient with me." "I'll be as patient as you need me to be," Ethan said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust again." Lily studied him for a long moment, then reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's take this one step at a time." Relief and gratitude washed over Ethan as he looked into her eyes. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. It wouldn't be easy and there were no guarantees, but he was willing to fight for her, for them. And as they sat there talking and laughing like old times, Ethan realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along, something real.
If you want this type of stories, then subscribe to Golden Chapter Whispers.